All right, let's give this a try.
The global pandemic.
So that is just a little bit about the International Day of Sign Language ecosystem. There's more sign languages than just American Sign Language. All right, so we're here to see how to better support deaf and hard of hearing students. This is everything you never wanted to ask about, but could use to help your deaf or hard of hearing student to become genius. All right, this is part one, what interpreters do. So, did you know a deaf person can do anything except hear? Anything a hearing person can do except hear. This is Gallaudet University's president, Ike Jordan. And let me tell you, he is deaf, and he's the first president for the University of Gallaudet, which is the school, the only liberal arts college where everything is taught in American Sign Language, and you have to be deaf to be a student there. It's pretty cool. Deaf doctors, deaf teacher, fireman, presenter and advocate, rapper, lawyer, deaf-blind lawyer, actress, actors. Such an amazing feat to have all of these wonderful role models. And the reason that it is such an amazing feat, take a look. 90% of deaf students have non-signing parents. Okay, this really impacts in a lot more ways than we think about. Okay, so first of all, can't communicate with mom and dad. Mom and dad can't communicate with you. Second, how do we learn language? Our parents talk to us. So, um, oh, how did we do that by accident? Okay, let's get back over here for a minute. There's a little bit more information on this here. So also, how do we learn about the world? Well, we learn about the world because we see things happening and hear conversations about them. And almost all our knowledge is what's called incidental knowledge, or stuff that you overhear. So deaf children don't overhear things. So when we have deaf doctors, deaf presenters, all that stuff, it's because people gave them access. And that's where interpreters come in. We give access. So let's watch a little bit about interpreters.
A hearing interpreter strives to neutrally and judiciously facilitate both cultural and linguistic intent between deaf and hearing parties. We are not just dealing with words, but the intent and emotion. A hearing interpreter strives to neutrally and judiciously facilitate both cultural and linguistic intent between deaf and hearing parties. We are not just dealing with words, but the intent and emotion behind and around those words. We do not give a word for word or a watered down summary of what someone is saying, but actually, sign language interpreting is mostly done simultaneously. So as you can see on stage, the interpreters are producing a linguistically, culturally, and dynamically equivalent message in American Sign Language, live, with just a few seconds of lag time. American Sign Language is rich with its own culture and grammar and regional accents, and it uses the face and the body to create richness and context that would otherwise be just a simple hand movement. It changes and flows with the culture around it. And in the case of simultaneous sign language interpreting, there are two processes happening in the brain: visual and auditory. According to studies, there are literally too many complex processes in simultaneous interpretation for even the world's best supercomputer to run at the same time. Interpreters must understand context along with tone, body language, facial expression, emotion, and produce a dynamically equivalent interpretation without disrupting the flow of conversation, no matter how intense it might get.
So let's take a look. What do interpreters do? They interpret the intent and the emotion. So when you guys all say things like, wow, you guys look so expressive, you're so expressive, that's because your voice is expressive. And we have to show that on our face. It isn't word for word. English and American Sign Language are vastly different languages. They do not line up. They don't line up by word, and they don't line up by meaning. And they are vastly different because one is linear and one is 3D. We don't tell a summary because that wouldn't do justice to your academic information that you're sharing. So it isn't just, we're not just summarizing the information, we are actually interpreting everything. And we also have to interpret culture and grammar differences, because when a deaf person hears something in sign language, it does not always translate. For example, we don't say it's raining cats and dogs in sign language. We say water's coming out of a bucket, and that means the same thing. So when you use it's raining cats and dogs and you have a specific purpose for using that, we have to interpret the culture about that. And it is two processes simultaneous. We are watching our deaf students or deaf clients to make sure that they are understanding. We are putting out the information visually through our hands, and at the same time, we are trying to listen and absorb all that you're saying and make it a picture. So that's what interpreters do. Let me give you another little tiny thing. This one's a little bit dry because it's old, but it's got some very important details. So if you could, please watch.
Here are a couple things to consider. When speaking to the student, speak at a normal pace and address them directly as opposed to speaking to the interpreter. The interpreter does not edit or delete spoken or signed information. The interpreter will be reading ahead and will familiarize themselves with the coming topics to prepare vocabulary. If there are assemblies or guest speakers, the interpreter needs as much material ahead of time as possible. Interpreters are members of the educational team and are available to address communication, accessibility, and deaf cultural issues as they arise. We've covered a lot of information, but rest assured you will no doubt adjust quickly. As this may be your first time working in a classroom with deaf or hard of hearing students, as well as an interpreter, we hope that you will always feel confident that you can address any concerns or questions with the interpreter and their support team. Thank you for watching, and have fun with your class.
Okay, so that was our first presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And here are a few different resources for you to look at and use. You can pause this video and copy them down, or if you would like them sent to you directly, we can send you those links. Have a wonderful day.